desert of trust. The cowboy and the Apache woman. The sun rose slowly over the endless desert, painting the sands in shades of gold and orange. The wind whispered across the dunes, carrying the dry, hot scent of the earth, breaths. A lone cowboy rode through the quiet land, his horse steady but slow. The cowboy had been traveling for days, looking for work and a place to rest. His hat shaded his face from the harsh sun, and his boots were dusty from the miles he had walked. He was used to the desert, but even he could feel its emptiness and danger. Desperate. The cowboy's name was James. He was strong and quiet, with eyes that had seen many hardships. He had grown up in small frontier towns, learning to survive by himself. He knew how to ride, hunt, and handle a horse with skill. But the desert was different. It was wide, silent, and unforgiving. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret, and every sound echoed like a warning. Far to the west, a small Apache camp lay hidden at the edge of the desert. A woman named Ayasha lived there with her family. She was young, strong, and wise in the ways of her people. Her hair was long and dark, her eyes bright and cautious. She had grown up learning the ways of the land, how to find water, track animals, and protect her people from danger. But she trusted few outsiders, because the desert had taught her that not everyone had good intentions. Ayasha noticed the figure of the cowboy on the horizon long before he reached her camp. Brash. She felt both curiosity and caution.
He was alone, and the desert had a way of hiding danger in plain sight.
She watched him silently from behind a ridge, seeing the horse slow as he seemed tired and thirsty. Something about him made her pause. He was not like the other men she had seen before. He moved carefully, with a respect for the land, not a desire to destroy it. The cowboy struggled through the hot morning, the sun beating down on his shoulders, round and desperate. His water supply was low, and the heat pressed against him like a heavy weight. He had been riding for hours, searching for a place to rest. Then, without warning, the wind picked up. A sandstorm began to rise from the desert floor, moving quickly toward him. The storm was sudden, as if the desert itself had decided to challenge him. James pulled his horse to a stop, shielding his face with his arm. The sand stung his skin and filled his eyes. He could barely see, and every step forward became dangerous. He knew he had to find shelter fast, or he would be trapped in the storm with no protection. Panic pressed at the edges of his mind, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had survived many storms before, but this one was stronger than any he had faced. From her hidden position, Ayasha saw the cowboy struggling against the wind. She made a decision. He was a stranger, and she did not trust him yet. But she could not watch him suffer. She ran quickly across the rocks, her feet sure on the uneven ground, and reached a small canyon where she had built a shelter. The shelter was simple, made of wood and hides, but it could protect someone from the worst of the storm. "Come here!" she called, her voice strong over the wind. The cowboy froze at first, unsure if he could trust her. But the storm was growing stronger, and he knew he had no choice. He guided his horse toward the canyon, following the voice that seemed like a lifeline. Ayasha helped him into the shelter, brushing sand from his coat and offering him water. James looked at her carefully, noticing the strength in her eyes and the calmness in her movements. She was different from anyone he had met. She did not smile easily, but there was a quiet kindness in the way she spoke. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but sincere. "I did not expect to find anyone out here." "You should not be alone in the desert," she replied. Her voice carried authority, but also a hint of concern. "It is dangerous. The land does not forgive carelessness." James nodded. He knew she was right. He had learned to survive, but even he could feel the desert's power. I underestimated it, he admitted. The storm raged outside, sand whipping against the shelter. Inside, it was quiet, filled only with the sounds of breathing and the occasional shift of the horse. James and Ayesha sat across from each other, studying one another in silence. They were from different worlds, but the desert had brought them together for a reason. Days passed, and the storm finally ended. The desert returned to its usual quiet, but the cowboy could not leave just yet. His horse needed rest, and he was too weak from the journey. Burrs. Ayesha allowed him to stay, but she remained cautious. She did not fully trust him, and she had reasons to be careful. Shh. Outsiders often brought trouble, and her family depended on her protection. James noticed her watchful eyes and did not try to hide his respect. He worked around the camp, helping to gather firewood and repair the small shelter. He learned quickly that Ayesha had her own ways, methods that he did not understand at first. She moved with the land, careful and precise, while he had been trained to act quickly and boldly. Their differences became apparent, but so did a growing mutual respect. In the evenings, they shared small conversations. James told stories of his life in frontier towns, of work in ranches and small farms. Ayesha spoke of her people, their traditions, and the lessons of the desert. They learned from each other, slowly building understanding. There was still caution between them, but trust began to grow like a small plant in the dry soil. One morning, James helped Ayesha gather water from a nearby spring. Psst. The journey was quiet, filled with the sounds of birds and the wind moving through the sparse desert trees. James stumbled slightly on a loose rock, and Ayesha reached out to steady him. Their hands touched briefly, and a small spark of something unspoken passed between them. Both quickly pulled back, aware that the desert was teaching them lessons beyond survival. Life in the camp became a rhythm. James learned to respect the rules Ayesha had set. He did not interfere with her family or her work, but offered help where it was welcome. Ayesha observed him closely, still wary but beginning to see that he was different. He was not like the men who came and went, leaving trouble behind. He was steady, patient, and surprisingly thoughtful. But the desert was never truly safe. Even as trust began to grow, shadows lurked in the distance. Travelers, settlers, and the harshness of the land itself reminded them that danger was always near. Ayesha taught James to watch the horizon, to notice subtle signs in the wind and the sand. He began to learn the language of the desert, a silent communication that had kept her people alive for generations. One evening a coyote howled in the distance, and James felt a shiver run down his spine. Ayesha noticed his unease and smiled faintly. "You are learning," she said softly.
The desert is not just land.
It is a teacher. It tests you, but it also shows who you can trust. James nodded, understanding more than the words themselves. He had come searching for work and shelter, but he had found something unexpected, a chance to connect, to understand another way of life. He did not yet know what the future held, but he felt that staying here, learning from Ayesha, could change him in ways he had never imagined. The days grew longer, and the bond between them grew stronger, though unspoken. They learned to share tasks, to move together without words, and to respect the rhythms of the desert. Brought new challenges. A sudden storm, a wounded animal, a shortage of water. But they faced them together. Through small successes and shared difficulties, a fragile trust began to take root. Slowly, but steadily. James thought often of the towns he had left behind, of the roads he had traveled, but none of it seemed as important as the lessons he was learning here. He began to see the desert not as an enemy, but as a place of possibility, where he could grow and learn alongside someone who understood it deeply. Ayesha watched him quietly, noting the changes in him, the way he moved with care, the way he considered his actions, and the respect he showed for the land and her people. The sun set one evening, painting the desert in warm colors, and James and Ayasha sat by a small fire. The wind was calm, and the horse grazed nearby. There was silence between them, comfortable and full of meaning. For the first time, the cowboy felt a sense of belonging, even if only temporary. The Apache woman, too, felt the stirrings of hope, that not every stranger brought danger and that trust could be found even in the harshest places. As night fell, the stars appeared, bright and countless in the clear desert sky. James looked up and wondered at their vastness, feeling small but part of something larger. Ayasha watched him, sensing the curiosity and wonder in his heart. The desert was full of secrets, but it had also brought them together, teaching lessons that neither could have learned alone. And so, under the endless sky, the cowboy and the Apache woman began a journey that would test their courage, their trust, and their hearts. The desert had claimed many before them, but it also had the power to reveal who could survive, not just in body, but in spirit. They did not know what challenges awaited, but they were no longer completely alone. They had found each other, and in that fragile connection lay the first seed of trust. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, bringing warmth to the sands and a soft golden light to the small Apache camp. James had slept lightly that night, listening to the distant sounds of the desert, the faint movement of animals, and the whispering wind through the rocks. He had learned to appreciate these quiet moments. The desert was harsh, but it also offered a kind of beauty that few towns could ever give. Ayasha moved through the camp with purpose, her hands skilled and sure. She gathered herbs and checked the small traps she had set for food. Her movements were quiet, practiced, and graceful, as if she and the desert were one. She had noticed the changes in James since he arrived. He was learning quickly, and though he was still a stranger, she could sense his efforts to respect the land and her people. James approached her cautiously, holding a small bundle of wood he had collected.
"I brought these for the fire," he said, his voice calm.
He handed it to her, careful not to interfere with her work. Ayasha glanced at him, then nodded, taking the wood and adding it to the growing pile.
"Good," she said simply. "You are learning." It was not just the tasks that James was learning. It was the way of thinking, the careful patience the desert demanded. He had grown up solving problems quickly, acting boldly, but here, speed without thought could be dangerous. Ayasha taught him to notice small signs, the way the wind shifted, the tracks of animals, the color of the sky. These things could mean life or death in the desert. Over the next few days, they worked side by side. James helped prepare the small shelter, reinforcing the walls and patching the roof with hides. Ayasha showed him how to gather water carefully, how to make it last, and how to find hidden springs that the land itself seemed to hide. Breaths. But he listened and watched, absorbing her lessons. Slowly, he began to understand that survival in this place was more than skill. It was respect for the land and for those who had learned its secrets over generations. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky, they set out to gather firewood from a nearby ridge. The heat pressed down on them, and the horses' hooves sank slightly into the sand. James noticed how Ayasha moved over the rocks, her steps light and sure, while he stumbled over uneven ground. He admired her strength and balance. How do you do it so easily?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Ayasha smiled faintly. "I grew up with the desert," she said. "It teaches you if you are willing to listen." "Us pay attention, not just move. A land will reward you if you respect it." Breath. James nodded. He realized that he had often tried to fight the world instead of understanding it.
Here he had to change. He had to listen, observe, and learn.
And in the process, He began to feel a new kind of respect, not just for the desert, but for Ayasha herself. She was strong, wise, and careful, and she had survived in a world that could be cruel to those who were careless. Their routine was disrupted one evening when a group of travelers appeared on the horizon. Ayasha noticed them first, scanning the land with sharp eyes. "Psst," she whispered a warning to James. "Strangers," she said, breath. "We do not know what they want." James felt a tightness in his chest. He had learned to trust his instincts in dangerous situations, and he could sense the tension in the air. The travelers rode slowly, observing the land and the camp. Ayasha stepped forward cautiously, keeping her hand near the small knife at her belt. The strangers seemed curious but not immediately hostile. They asked questions about the area, about water and trails, but Ayasha remained calm, answering only what she needed to. James watched silently, learning how she handled the situation. He realized that her caution was not fear, it was wisdom. She knew that trust could not be given easily, and that survival often depended on careful judgment. He felt a deep respect for her ability to remain composed under pressure. After the travelers left, Ayasha turned to James. "You see," she said, "not everyone is friendly. Not everyone is honest. You must watch. Always." James nodded. "I understand," he said. "I will be careful." Days passed, and the bond between them continued to grow. They shared stories by the fire in the evenings, speaking of lives lived in very different worlds. James spoke of frontier towns, of work on ranches, and of long journeys across the plains. Ayasha spoke of her people, their traditions, and the ways they had survived for generations. They began to understand each other, not just in words, but in actions and habits. One day, James noticed a small garden near the camp.
Ayasha had grown plants carefully, using the little water she could spare.
"This is amazing," he said, bending down to examine the soil and the small sprouts. "You grow life even in the desert."
Ayasha nodded.
"The desert is hard, but it can give life if you respect it, just like people. You must nurture them carefully, with patience." James thought about those words. He realized that trust, like the garden, needed patience and care. It could not be forced, and it could not be rushed. He had lived a life of quick decisions and fleeting relationships, but here he was learning something new. A slow, careful understanding of another person and of the land that sustained them both. Their lessons were tested one morning when a sudden accident occurred. Bruce. James had been riding the horse to gather water from a distant spring when the animal stumbled on a loose rock. He was thrown to the ground, twisting his ankle badly. The pain shot through him, and he could not stand. Ayasha reached him quickly, her eyes full of concern. "Are you hurt badly?" she asked. James nodded, gritting his teeth. "I think my ankle is twisted. I can't move it." Ayasha examined him carefully, her hands steady. She helped him onto the horse, guiding it slowly back to the camp. Along the way, James realized how much he relied on her. He had never asked for help often, but now he understood that asking for help was not weakness, it was trust. Back at the camp, Ayasha made a splint for his ankle and tended to him patiently. James watched her work, noting the care and attention she gave. He felt a warmth in his chest, a connection that went beyond mere gratitude. He realized that trust was growing between them, slowly but surely, like a small flame in the desert night.
As he rested, he reflected on his journey.
He had come searching for work and shelter, but he had found something far more valuable, a chance to learn, to grow, and to connect with someone who had shown him patience and kindness.
Ayasha had not rushed to trust him, but she had not turned him away either.
But she had allowed him to prove himself, to show that he could respect her ways in the land they shared. Over the next weeks, James's ankle healed, and he began to regain his strength. He continued to work alongside Ayasha, helping her with daily tasks and learning more about the desert. They moved together with an ease that had not been there before, understanding each other's rhythms and habits. Their bond grew quietly, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the knowledge that the desert demanded cooperation and care. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in deep reds and purples, James and Ayasha sat by a small fire. The horse grazed nearby, and the air was cool and still. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable. Both understood that trust was delicate, yet it was forming between them steadily. "You have learned much," Ayasha said finally, breaking the silence. "Not just about the land, but about patience and respect." James looked at her, seeing the wisdom in her eyes. "I am learning," he said. "You have taught me more than I thought I could learn." Ayasha nodded. "Good. The desert is not easy, but it rewards those who listen and watch. You have begun to understand it. And that is the first step in trust." James smiled faintly, feeling a sense of belonging that he had never known. He knew that the road ahead would be challenging, that the desert could be harsh and unforgiving. But he also knew that with Ayasha, he could face those challenges. He had begun to trust her, and in return, she had begun to trust him. The stars appeared above them, bright and countless in the clear desert sky. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light on their faces. They watched in silence, understanding that the desert had brought them together for a reason. It had tested them, challenged them, and taught them lessons that neither could have learned alone. And so, in the quiet desert, a cowboy and an Apache woman continued to build a fragile but growing trust. Each day brought new challenges and small victories, shaping their bond and preparing them for the trials that lay ahead. The desert was still wide, still harsh, but they had begun to navigate it together, learning to rely on each other and to respect the land that sustained them both. The desert stretched endlessly, its golden sands shimmering under the rising sun. James had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of life near Ayasha's camp, but even with the trust they were building, the past could not be ignored. The cowboy's past was never far behind him, and the desert, though beautiful, had a way of reminding people of what they had left behind. James had once worked for a large rancher in a distant town. The work had been hard, but it had paid well enough to keep him moving. He had left because the rancher's demands had grown dangerous, pushing him into work that he no longer wanted to do. Leaving had been the only choice, though it had cost him more than he realized. He knew the rancher would not forget him, and the fear of being tracked was a constant shadow at the edges of his mind. Ayasha noticed his distant look one morning as they walked through the desert gathering firewood and checking traps. "You are thinking about something else," she said softly. Her voice was calm but probing, showing the wisdom of someone who could read people well. James sighed. "The past has a way of following me," he admitted. "I thought I had left it behind, but I know it can catch up." Ayasha nodded, understanding more than he could see. She had her own past filled with memories of raids, betrayals, and the dangers that outsiders could bring. Her people had learned to survive by watching, waiting, and trusting only when it was safe. She did not speak often of her pain, but she knew it had shaped her and made her cautious. Days passed, and the tension between past and present began to surface. One afternoon, as they worked near a small water hole, James spotted a distant figure on horseback. His heart tightened. The rider carried the emblem of his former rancher, a mark that was impossible to ignore. A fear surged through him. and he knew that trouble had arrived. Ayasha noticed his sudden stillness. What is it?" she asked, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They are coming for me," James said quietly. "I left a life behind, but it seems it has followed me here." Ayasha considered this, her mind racing. She had protected her people from dangers before, but this was different. The threat was not the land or the weather. It was a man with power and anger, and he would not leave easily. She placed a hand on James's shoulder, steady and firm. "We will face it together," she said. "The desert has taught you patience and caution. Now it will teach you courage and trust." The approaching rider drew closer, and James could see the rancher's stern face, filled with anger and authority. "James, you cannot escape your debts," the man shouted. His horse galloped across the sand, kicking up clouds of dust. James felt a surge of fear, but Ayasha's presence gave him strength. She had taught him to observe, to plan, and to act with care. He now realized that running blindly would not solve anything. Instead, he needed to face the danger, relying on the lessons of the desert and the support of the woman who had taught him to trust. Ayasha moved beside him, her eyes sharp and unyielding.
She called to her small band of helpers who emerged silently from hidden spots around the camp.
They were skilled and quick, knowing the land as well as she did. The desert itself seemed to lend them its strength, every shadow and dune becoming a part of their plan. The rancher's horse slowed slightly, sensing the presence of multiple people. He shouted again, demanding James's return. Desperate, James stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear. "I will not go back," he said firmly.
"I left that life behind. You have no claim over me here." Ayasha watched him closely.
She could see the determination in his eyes, a reflection of the respect and courage he had been learning. The desert had tested him before, and now it would test his heart and resolve. Tension hung in the air like heat over the sand. The rancher considered his options, realizing that the cowboy was no longer alone, and that the desert was not a place to act without thought. Slowly he waved his hand and turned his horse away, retreating with a warning. "This is not over," he said, "but we will meet again." James exhaled, relief washing over him. He had survived the confrontation not just because of his own skill, but because he had learned to trust Ayasha and the land itself.
He looked at her, gratitude and admiration clear in his eyes.
"Thank you," he said quietly. Ayasha nodded, her expression softening. "You are learning," she said. "Trust is not just about people. It is about understanding the world around you. You have begun to do that." The days after the confrontation were filled with quiet reflection. James tended to the camp, helping with repairs and food gathering, but he also spent time learning from Ayasha in deeper ways. Bess. She taught him how to track animals with subtle signs, how to find water even when it seemed hidden, and how to read the sky for weather changes. Each lesson strengthened their bond and reinforced the fragile trust between them. One evening, as the sun set and painted the desert in fiery reds and oranges, Ayasha and James sat near a small fire. The horse grazed nearby, and the air was calm. They spoke quietly, sharing personal stories and secrets that had been kept hidden for years. "I never thought I would find peace," James said, staring into the flames. "I thought the desert would only challenge me, but you have shown me something different. You have taught me patience, trust, and courage." Ayasha looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight.
"You have learned quickly," she said, "but trust is not yet complete."
"The desert will test us again. It always does. But we are stronger together than alone." Their bond grew deeper over time, tested by both the past and the present. They faced small challenges, a sudden storm, a wild animal near the camp, or the scarcity of water. But each time they learned to rely on one another. James had come as a lone traveler, unsure of the world and of himself. Now he was part of a partnership built on respect, skill, and growing affection. Ayasha, too, felt change within her. She had been cautious and careful for years, trusting only herself and her people. But James had shown her patience, strength, and a willingness to learn. She began to see that not all outsiders brought danger, and that trust could be shared without weakness. One afternoon they discovered that a small part of the camp had been disturbed, perhaps by wind, or perhaps by an animal. James moved quickly to repair the damage, but Ayasha stopped him.
"Not so fast," she said.
"The desert will teach you if you rush. Watch and listen first." He slowed, observing the patterns in the sand and the plants. Slowly he understood what she meant. Patience was not just a lesson, it was survival. The desert had tested him before, and it would continue to do so. But now he had learned to face it with calm and careful thought. As the weeks passed, their connection became stronger, though neither spoke openly of feelings yet. The trust they were building was not just practical, it was emotional. They shared small gestures of care, quiet moments of laughter, and the understanding that they could rely on each other in ways they had never expected.
But life in the desert was never simple.
Even as their trust grew, James could feel the weight of his past pressing against him. The rancher's warning echoed in his mind, a reminder that danger could return at any time. Ayasha sensed his unease and spoke quietly one evening.
"You carry more than just your past," she said.
"But you have shown strength and courage. Do not let fear control you." James nodded, feeling the truth in her words. But he had survived by running before. But now he knew he could face challenges head-on. He had learned to trust Ayasha, the land, and himself. The desert had shaped him, teaching lessons that could not be learned in towns or on open plains. One night, as the stars filled the sky and the desert grew quiet, James and Ayasha sat together, listening to the wind. They had faced danger, shared lessons, and learned from the harshness of the land. Their bond had grown from necessity into something deeper, a fragile trust that could withstand the trials of both the desert and the past. Ayasha looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You are ready for what comes next," she said softly. "The desert will test you again, but you have learned to stand, to face fear, and to trust. That is the beginning of strength." James smiled faintly, feeling a quiet confidence he had never known before. "I am ready," he said, "and I will face it with you." The desert was still vast and unforgiving, but for the first time James did not feel alone. He had faced the shadows of his past, learned to rely on another person, and discovered the power of trust. The Apache woman had taught him patience, courage, and understanding, and he had begun to see that life could be shared, even in the harshest places. And so, in the desert that tested everyone, the cowboy and the Apache woman continued to grow closer. Each day brought new lessons, challenges, and victories, shaping not only their survival but also the beginnings of a bond that neither time nor distance could easily break. The desert had tested them, but it had also shown them the value of trust, patience, and courage.
The desert air was hotter than usual that morning, and the wind carried the dry scent of sand and rock.
James and Ayasha were up early, moving with care through the dunes to gather supplies and check the traps they had set.
The lessons of the desert had become second nature to James.
He moved more cautiously now, reading the land, noticing small shifts in the wind, and paying attention to even the slightest signs of danger.
Ayasha watched him,
impressed by how quickly he had adapted.
Life had grown steady, almost peaceful. But the desert had a way of reminding those who lived there that danger could arrive without warning. James felt a strange tension in the air, a faint prickle that something was about to happen. Ayasha noticed it too. She stopped, crouching slightly, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. "They are coming," she said quietly, almost to herself. Her voice held no fear, only calm certainty. James followed her gaze and saw movement far off, a cloud of dust rising where figures on horseback approached. His heart tightened. They were not travelers this time. The riders were armed, and the way they moved showed that they meant trouble.
Ayasha turned to James. "We must prepare.
The desert will test us again, but this time it will be more than a lesson. It will be a trial." James felt a surge of determination. He had learned patience, trust, and courage. Now he would put it all into practice. He and Ayasha moved quickly but quietly, checking the camp and ensuring the horse was secure. The small shelter was reinforced, and they had enough water and supplies to withstand a short siege if necessary. The riders approached faster, their voices carrying across the desert. They were a group of bandits, looking to take what they could and leave destruction behind. James's first instinct had been to fight alone, but he had learned that the desert rewarded teamwork, observation, and careful action. By Ayasha. And she nodded. They understood each other without words. As the bandits reached the outskirts of the camp, Ayasha stepped forward, her presence commanding and calm. She raised her hand, signaling for James to stay ready but hidden. "This land is not yours," she called out. Her voice was steady, carrying across the sand. "Leave now, or you will face the consequences." The bandits laughed, thinking that a lone woman and a single cowboy could not oppose them. One of them spurred his horse forward, trying to intimidate the pair. But James moved silently behind a dune, using the cover to position himself where he could act if necessary. He remembered Ayasha's lessons. Never rush, always watch, always plan. The first attack came suddenly. One bandit swung a lasso, trying to capture the horse, but Ayasha moved quickly, pulling it aside and cutting the rope with a precise strike. Another tried to approach her from behind, but James intercepted, blocking the path and forcing the rider back. The fight was chaotic, but both moved with skill and awareness. Ayasha had taught James how to use the desert itself as an ally. They guided the bandits into uneven terrain, where the sand slowed them and the rocks could be used for cover. Each movement was calculated, every step planned. James realized that he was no longer the inexperienced cowboy who had stumbled into the desert days before. He had grown stronger, faster, and smarter. The battle continued for hours, the sun climbing high and beating down on everyone. The bandits underestimated the duo, thinking they were easy prey. But James and Ayasha worked seamlessly together. He covered her when she needed space, and she guided him when strategy mattered more than strength. Their trust, built over weeks of learning and small victories, became their greatest weapon.
During a pause in the fight, one bandit tried to flank them, coming from the side with a raised weapon.
James saw him just in time and shouted a warning to Ayasha. She pivoted, striking with precision and forcing the bandit to retreat. They had learned to anticipate each other, to communicate silently through movement and observation. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the battle reached its peak. The last bandit, realizing he was outmatched, tried to escape, but James and Ayasha cornered him near the edge of a rocky outcrop. They did not strike in anger, only in defense. The desert had taught them control, patience, and fairness. The bandits surrendered, recognizing that they were no ordinary targets. Breathing heavily, they lowered their weapons. The camp was safe, the horse unharmed, and the desert once again quiet. James looked at Ayasha, admiration and relief in his eyes. "We did it," he said softly. Ayasha nodded, her expression calm but pleased. "We did," she replied. "Together. That is what matters."
The desert had tested them, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally.
They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, yet they had emerged stronger and more united. The trust between them had become unbreakable in the heat of battle. Breath.
Each had relied on the other completely, proving that together they could face anything. After the bandits had left, James helped Ayasha repair small damages to the camp.
The shelter had been scratched and the firewood scattered, but nothing vital was lost. They worked side by side, the quiet rhythm of repair a contrast to the chaos of the battle. In these moments, the bond between them grew even deeper. As night fell, they sat together near a small fire, the stars bright and clear above them. The desert was peaceful once more, the wind carrying only the soft sounds of animals in distant dunes. James looked at Ayasha, realizing how much he had learned from her, not just about the desert, but about life, trust, and courage. "You have changed," Ayasha said, breaking the silence. "You are not the same man who stumbled into my camp weeks ago. Patience, respect, and trust. You are ready for whatever comes next." James smiled faintly, feeling a warmth he had never known. "I have learned because of you," he said. "You taught me to see, to listen, and to act carefully. You taught me trust." Ayasha's eyes softened. "Trust is more than safety," she said. "It is understanding, patience, and knowing that someone will stand by you when it matters most. You have earned it, James." Psst. "And so have I." They shared a quiet moment, the firelight flickering across their faces. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but they had found strength in each other. Their bond had grown from necessity to respect, and from respect to something deeper, unspoken but undeniable. The next morning they prepared for the journey ahead. There would be more challenges, more dangers, and more lessons from the desert. But they knew they could face them together. James had learned to trust Ayasha, the land, and himself, and Ayasha had begun to trust him fully. Breaths. Their steps in harmony, their minds alert, and their hearts steady. The challenges of the world had tested them, but they had survived, stronger and closer than ever before. The desert, once a place of fear and isolation, had become a place of growth, trust, and quiet joy. As they walked, James thought about the future. He had no idea what awaited them beyond the horizon, but he felt confident that whatever came, he would face it with Ayasha by his side. She had taught him lessons he could not have learned anywhere else, and he had proven that he could rise to meet challenges with patience, courage, and care.
Ayasha, too, felt hope.
She had survived many hardships, but this partnership was new. It brought strength, trust, and the knowledge that even in the harshest desert, people could find connection, understanding, and loyalty. She had not expected to trust another so quickly, but James had earned it through action, patience, and respect. As the sun set, painting the desert in deep golds and purples, they set up camp for the night. The horse grazed quietly nearby, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of the desert. They sat together by the fire, reflecting on the day's trials and victories, their trust and bond stronger than ever. The desert had tested them, but it had also shown them the value of working together, of relying on one another, and of facing challenges with patience and courage. They knew more trials would come, but they also knew that they could meet them as a team, with trust as their guide and the desert as their teacher. And so, under the endless stars, the cowboy and the Apache woman rested, ready for the next day, ready for the challenges of the world, and ready to face whatever the desert would send their way. The desert morning was calm, the sun rising slowly over golden dunes and rocky outcrops.
James and Ayasha had slept lightly, alert to the quiet sounds of the desert. Bursies and bandits had passed. They knew that life in this land required constant attention. The desert was beautiful, but it was never easy. Its lessons were hard but fair, and they had both learned to respect them. James moved through the camp with ease now, carrying water and checking the horse, his movement steady and confident. He had grown stronger, not just in body but in mind. The desert had tested him in ways he had never imagined, but he had survived because of patience, careful observation, and trust. Most importantly, he had survived with Ayasha by his side. Ayasha was already awake, preparing the small fires for cooking and checking the traps they had set the previous day. She noticed James watching her, the quiet admiration in his eyes. He had changed since the day he stumbled into her camp, more careful, more aware, more connected to the land and its rhythms. "You have grown," she said, her voice calm and strong. "Not just in skill, but in understanding. The desert has tested you, and you have passed." James smiled. "I have grown because of you," he said. Breaths. "You taught me how to see, how to listen, and how to trust. I could not have done it alone." They worked together through the morning, collecting water, repairing the shelter, and tending to the small garden Ayasha had cultivated. James had learned the subtle ways of the desert, the best times to move, how to read the tracks of animals, how to find water in places that seemed empty. Ayasha watched him with quiet pride, seeing the careful thought he put into every action. As the day progressed, they began planning for the future. The desert was still unpredictable, and danger could appear without warning, but they had proven that they could face it together. They discussed ways to make the camp safer, ways to store water more efficiently, and ways to protect themselves from outsiders who might come with ill intentions. James learned to respect not only the land but also Ayasha's decisions, but she had survived here for years, and her knowledge was invaluable. He no longer acted impulsively, rushing into tasks without thinking. Frowned. He observed, listened, and moved with care. In turn, Ayasha began to trust him completely, knowing that he would act wisely and honorably in any situation. Breaths. One afternoon, they noticed smoke rising from a distant ridge. They approached cautiously, staying low to the ground and observing the source. It was a small group of travelers who seemed lost and frightened. Ayasha hesitated, recalling the dangers of strangers. But James stepped forward, speaking calmly. "They need help," he said. "We have learned that trust is given when it is needed. We can help carefully." Together they approached the travelers, offering water, food, and guidance. The travelers were grateful, amazed that anyone would help them in such a harsh place. James and Ayasha worked as a team, guiding the group safely through the desert toward a safe path, showing that trust could be extended beyond themselves, without risk. After the travelers had gone, they returned to the camp, tired but satisfied. The act reminded them both that life in the desert was not only about survival, but also about connection and compassion. James realized that trust was not a weakness, it was a strength, a bond that could save lives and build communities even in the most unforgiving places. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, James and Ayasha sat by the fire. The desert was calm, filled with the gentle sounds of animals moving quietly in the distance. They shared a simple meal, speaking little but feeling the depth of their bond in the comfortable silence. Ayasha looked at James, her eyes reflecting the firelight.
"You have changed," she said softly.
"Not just in how you survive, but in how you live. You have learned patience, courage, and trust. And you have shown kindness even when it was not required." James felt warmth in his chest, a quiet happiness he had not known for years. breaths. I have learned because of you, he replied. Because you trusted me, guided me, and let me grow, breath. I am stronger, wiser, and more patient than I ever was before, and I will stay here with you as long as you will have me. Ayasha's expression softened, a rare smile appearing on her face.
The desert is harsh, but it gives what is deserved, she said.
Breath. We have learned together, and now we will live together, not just to survive, but to thrive. Though over the next few weeks, their life settled into a steady rhythm. James helped expand the small garden, digging channels to make the most of the scarce water. He repaired and strengthened the shelter, adding small touches that made it safer and more comfortable. Ayasha taught him the traditional ways of her people, showing how to gather herbs for medicine, track animals for food, and predict weather changes with subtle signs. In turn, James shared his knowledge of tools, knots, and survival techniques from the frontier towns. They learned from each other, blending traditions and creating a way of life that was stronger than either could have managed alone. The desert had shaped them both, teaching lessons in patience, respect, and teamwork. One day, while exploring a nearby ridge, James stumbled upon a small patch of wildflowers growing among the rocks. Rants. He knelt to admire them, their colors bright against the muted tones of sand and stone. Ayasha joined him, smiling quietly.
Even here, life finds a way, she said. The desert is not only danger and struggle.
Brave way. It is also beauty and hope. James nodded, understanding more than just the words. He realized that their bond, like the flowers, had grown despite the harshness around them. Trust and care, patience and courage had created something strong and resilient. He had come to the desert alone, uncertain and wary, but now he had a home, a partner, and a purpose. As the weeks turned into months, the desert life became their own. They faced small storms, wild animals, and the occasional wandering stranger, but each challenge was met with skill, patience, and cooperation. Their trust in each other was absolute, Pate. They had learned to anticipate each other's movements, communicate silently, and act with confidence. One night, as stars blanketed the desert sky, James and Ayasha sat together by the fire. The horse grazed quietly nearby, and the air was cool. They spoke of their hopes, their fears, and the lessons the desert had taught them. The bond between them had grown beyond survival. It was now a deep connection built on trust, respect, and shared experience. James looked at Ayasha, feeling a sense of peace he had never known. Beth's. I came here looking for work and shelter, he said quietly, but I found something far greater. I found trust, courage, and someone to share life with. I never imagined the desert could give me this. Ayasha reached out, placing her hand on his. The desert tests everyone, she said softly. It shows who is strong, who is patient, and who is wise. You have passed those tests, James. You are no longer just a traveler. You are part of this land and part of my life. Together, we will continue to grow and protect what we have built. The fire crackled, casting warm light across their faces. The desert, once a place of fear and challenge, had become a place of hope, growth, and connection. They had survived because of trust, patience, and courage. They had learned to rely on each other completely. And in that reliance, they had found something rare and precious: companionship, understanding, and love. As the night deepened, they lay down near the fire, the horse nearby, and looked up at the vast desert sky. The stars seemed endless, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the smallness of individual struggles. But they also represented possibilities, paths, and the promise of the future. Great. James felt a quiet confidence. No matter what challenges might come, he knew he could face them. He had survived storms, danger, and fear. He had learned to trust, to act with patience, and to respect the land and the people around him. And most importantly, he had found a partner in Ayasha, someone who shared his journey and who would face the future with him. Ayasha, too, felt hope. She had been cautious and strong for many years, protecting her people and surviving the harsh desert alone. But James had proven himself worthy of trust, and together they had built something new, a life filled with cooperation, understanding, and quiet happiness. She realized that the desert, which had tested her so harshly, had also given her a companion who shared her values and her heart. The next morning they rose with the sun, ready to face the day. The desert was still vast and challenging, but they were ready. Together they would continue to build their home, expand their garden, and explore the land. They would meet challenges with patience, courage, and trust, knowing that their bond was stronger than any danger the desert could bring. As they walked side by side, James looked at Ayasha and smiled. Perceptibly. "The desert taught us many lessons," he said. "But the most important one is that trust can change everything." Ayasha nodded, her eyes bright. "And that trust, once earned, can last forever," she replied. The desert stretched endlessly around them, golden and warm in the morning light. But for James and Ayasha, it was no longer a place of danger and loneliness. It was a home, a teacher, and a reminder that trust, patience, and courage could create a life even in the harshest conditions. And so, the cowboy and the Apache woman continued their life in the desert. They worked together, laughed together, and faced the challenges of the land with strength and care. The lessons of the past, the dangers they had overcome, and the bond they had built would guide them through all days to come. They had found safety, companionship, and hope in the vast desert, proving that trust could flourish even in the most unlikely places. The sun rose higher, casting warm light across the sands. The desert was alive with possibilities. And James and Ayasha moved forward together, ready to face them. The cowboy had found more than survival. He had found a partner. And the Apache woman had found someone she could trust, someone who respected her, the land, and the life they were building. Together they faced the desert, not as strangers or survivors, but as equals, friends, and companions. The desert had tested them, but it had also given them life, trust, and hope. And under the endless sky, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.